him. Think about that. There's a sermon I just put away this a few minutes ago. It was in my other Bible. I was going to bring it. Not the sermon, but the Bible. I said, I don't really need that, but let me put it. And the sermon is without Jesus. And I thought about that when I was thinking about this here. Imagine it without him. And so here
I wouldn't want to live.
Yeah. And some people do live without him. Or they think they're living.
As a nation, we're pretty close to that.
Yeah. We've got to,
Yeah. Scary, isn't it?
Further and further.
Further, and look at, and before we, oh, you almost put my whole card. I almost got to the end of the message, but let me hold up the teaching. But hold that thought, and I'll come back in about a half hour, 40 minutes. Yeah, think about what you just said, and how powerful that ties in, and where Job is, and where he is now, because he feels as though his hand is far from him. Listen, we know God has his heart on Job because we read it. Have you tried my servant Job? We know his heart, where his heart is. And here's something I learned, and I remember years ago, when it came to Jacob, Jacob was working to marry Rachel. You know the story?
Yeah,
and
he
Laban
was supposed
tricked
to
him?
work
7 years? Right.
And then the father did the switcheroo, and
Yep.
on his wedding night gave him Lee instead of
Leah.
Rachel.
Absolutely.
And he said, well, you finish out this week with her, and then you work another 7 years, and you can have,
Rachel.
because it wasn't the custom to let the younger one be married before the older daughter.
Awesome.
And he didn't know on the wedding night that
Leah.
it was Lee he was with,
Right.
instead of the one he loved.
Yep. Great point. And Laban, the uncle, tricked him. But
He was a shady guy.
here's what these names mean. Watch where I'm going with this. Leah means holiness. And this came to my mind real quick when I was preparing. Rachel, watch this, Chuck, is happiness. You know what God was saying? You can't have happiness before you have holiness. You have to have Leah first before you get Rachel. Powerful moment. Even though their custom was you have to marry the older first, here's what God was saying in his wisdom in that moment. You can't have Rachel first. And this is something the world has to understand. Watch this. The world is after happiness, but they don't want holiness. See, they believe happiness, I could mess with this all day. Happiness comes from God's hand. Holiness comes from his heart. But you have to have holiness first before you get to happiness. So I'd rather be married, now that I know it, before I wanted the same thing. I wanted Rachel. What? She was pretty to look at. She Rachel was a knockout.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
yeah. And something about Leah was
not as attractive. Yeah, and that's in the scriptures. Right. When you look at Leah, you're like, oh my God. But you look at Rachel like, yeah, man, for real. But God says, you know what? Rachel represents holiness. Happiness. Leah represents holiness. You can't have happiness before Lord have mercy.
You know what?
Wow.
Being an American and in our customs and everything, it makes you wonder why Rachel would stand for that, because she knew that.
You mean Leah?
Either one of them.
Well, yeah.
The father.
It was arranged marriage,
yeah.
and they were submissive, I guess, to their father.
Imagine how Leah felt. But in turn, if I remember right, Rachel couldn't have children.
She couldn't have children.
Yeah.
And Leah was the one
having all the children.
Having more, yeah.
Wow.
Ways her.
Yeah. Yeah, and so here, Job knows he has God's heart. He's more concerned with his hand. Don't take your hand as a personal. But watch this. He says, let not thy dread, which is the word fear, make me afraid. He's really concerned with, and this is what really threw me and set me down for a moment. He's concerned that his communion and his communication with God have been cut off. Can you imagine if God stopped talking to us? In your Bible, most Bibles, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, they were producing them with blank pages. And people, and I thought it was, would you say, Henrietta?
I was saying because of his silence.
Yeah. Between Malachi and Matthew, God had went silent for 400 years.
Wow.
And so, some of your Bibles, and I thought it was the pages for note taking. I said, we can write right here. I just start taking notes and scribbling all over it. But it's indicating God hadn't said a word. 400, not 4 hours, 4 minutes, 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months, 400 years.
Wow.
Nothing. And for people who are used to hearing from him, through either signs and wonders or miracles or however he did it and desired to do it, nothing. And so Job...
How many generations is that? You think about, your lifetime, your life. I mean, if you stacked them one on top of the other, how many generations is that?
Yeah, and think about that, darling. And if you turn to Matthew 1, watch this, because this is important. After 400 years, after prophets and priests and all those individuals he was using to get to this moment, watch what he says in Matthew 1:1. And this is important. See that? It says, listen from the King James. Yeah. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham, and then he goes through all these begats. And it goes all the way back and traces them. And he's saying from all that time since then, here we are now. And now I've decided to speak again. And it's through Christ that he's going to speak. Wow. So Job is afraid of lost community and communication. And he believes that it all had ceased. And he says, listen, and this is what we want people to understand and for us to grasp this morning. And so God says, listen, record for us 2 fears. There's improper fear, and then there's proper fear. Improper fear is that God will hurt us.
Well, what?
Improper fear is that God will hurt us. That's the wrong kind of fear you should have. Why is that? Let me pause for a moment. Why do you think God would hurt us? Why would we think that?
You live in sin. You fear him.
Punishment?
Okay, yeah. And is there anything wrong with that fear? Anything wrong with that?
Might inspire you to change your life.
Yeah, okay. So it's a good fear. And here's the other side of the coin. God does not desire to hurt us. That's not who he is.
He would rather bless us.
He would rather have grace and mercy towards us than to hurt us. But it doesn't mean that we can continue in sin. Paul says, God forbid. But we have to understand the improper fear is that God will hurt us. That's not who he is. Darling, you have a moment?
Well, there again, you look at your relationship with your children, and when they need discipline, you're going to get to paddle out, or they don't do that anymore. But
yeah, and what we're teaching them is there are consequences to our wrong behavior. And so God's going to be steadfast in that. He doesn't change that about him, but it's improper fear for us to think that he wants to hurt us. If we make the choice to sin or to do wrong, there are consequences, and they do come. But it's not his desire, and we shouldn't be afraid. The proper fear we should have, watch this one, is that we will hurt God. Wow. So that means wherever I go, Chuck, wherever I am, Russell, whatever I do, Henrietta, whomever I'm talking with or in the presence of, the proper fear I should have is that I will hurt God. My mind. Whether it's in my house or at Walmart or at the light or wherever.
do you ever wish in your prayer time, you're on your knees or wherever, how you're talking to God? And I know God uses many means to speak to us. You turn on Tony Evans or look at your book or anything. But sometimes I just wish that God would have a conversation with me just like we are.
Wow.
Well, don't you? Don't you sometimes sit down and just,
As far as hearing, depends on the conversation, how it's presented, audible, whether I hear a voice or not. Is
I
that
mean,
what you're
don't you
saying?
wish you could sit down and talk to God?
I know what she's saying.
Yeah.
Just like this.
Person to person.
Like you would
Yeah.
talk to your daddy. And
Yeah.
you would say, you know, Daddy,
Yeah.
you know, this really hurt, and,
Mhm.
or whatever, and tell me what I need to know. Tell me
Yeah.
what I should do, or, I want that.
Yeah.
I want God to
That's-
speak to me in a conversation where,
Wow. That's a serious desire for your personal relationship. There's nothing wrong with that. You should desire that. And how he goes about
am
it.
I alone or wrong?
No.
At any time that you wish that God would talk back to you in an audible voice and tell you what you
Yeah.
should be doing?
Yeah.
Or,
And I think the closest we're going to come to that is through his spirit. I do.
and occasionally, yeah.
Yeah, and I think
You know,
that he
there are
also,
times when I hear
yeah,
him speaking to my spirit.
yeah. And sometimes what we have to be careful of, he has different ways of doing it, and we will ignore it. I don't want to hear what Chuck has to say. That ain't God. Well, it is God. That's who sent him.
Yeah.
He sent him to tell me, and if I check you off, I've missed him. And so there are moments where he does speak and how he goes about it. I think, if anything, darling, it would be almost like us trying to. And I know what you're saying. I don't want to belabor that point, belittle it, but it's important. Your desire is, I'm sorry, I want to say this, but we don't want to put him in a box where, I'm talking to you now, you should speak. He doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't.
He does, it's on his own time, and that's what
It's our own
he's
humanness
sovereign.
that we want to talk
Absolutely.
to him, just like we would talk to our father
Yep.
or our
Our
mother.
mother, yep,
Or sometimes
someone-
we
anyone.
want the answers so quickly,
right.
and it increases our faith and our dependence on him when we have to daily keep on seeking him
You got
and
it.
digging
Yeah,
deeper.
daily. You got it. Yeah, absolutely. Well put. Yep, you have to. Because what would happen, Chuck, watch this. If he told me what was going to happen, I might alter the course. I won't go that way. I won't do that. I think I'll go over this way. But it's already late. Here's what I do know about what you're saying. To him, all of this is history. He already knew we were going to be here. He knew exactly Missy was going to be babysitting, Craig and Lloyd doing that, what they need to do, Jeff doing what he needs to do, and we'd be here. He already knew that. While we sat around and said, okay, here's Russell, here's Chuck, Missy, here's Darla. He says, you know what? I knew they was going to be there. And so while we want the conversation, but you're on it because your faith, it wouldn't. Here's what came out this morning, and I know it will come out again. We walk by faith, not by sight.
Yeah, well, it would be simple if he would do that. He wouldn't have to have the faith in him.
Right.
Yeah.
That knowledge
Right.
would just be,
Yeah,
Okay, tell me then my next step.
yeah,
Tell me the next step. You're right.
yeah. And Darla said it, that the faith is strengthened, and this is the word I like what she really said. We're dependent upon him.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And he's like any other parent who, I want you to come and ask me.
Can't you imagine how Abraham felt when the Lord told him that he was going to make his descendants as numerous as the sands on the seashore and the stars in the sky? And but by the time
Isaac.
God got ready to give him his son,
Mhm.
he was ancient.
Yeah,
I mean-
99, I think it is. And Isaac is born, and we just wrote that on our Facebook post, that God tells him, okay, since you've been waiting on him for so long, and Sarah laughed, named him Isaac, which means laughter, take him up on Mount Moriah and sacrifice him.
Now say that again. It's because she laughed?
Yeah, she laughed at the idea.
Right,
that-
she did.
Yeah, and his name
the angel
Isaac.
said, why did you laugh? And she said, I didn't.
Yeah,
She did.
she did. And he said, you shall name him Isaac, which means laughter. And God says, take him, who that boy you've been waiting for. Can you imagine Chuck taking one of your sons? I would faint at the idea of taking him to tea somewhere and having to sacrifice him. Think about that. So you're on a good point. And Abraham just by faith.
But don't you think that over the years he got discouraged maybe, or?
Well, yeah, sure. Sure, but when it's a faith walk with God, all of us have been there. I'm in a moment right now, I'll be very, very generic with you, that a decision has to be made. without the particulars. It has to be made.